Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here with another edition of the Trek News Desk, where I bring you all the week's news from Star Trek. This week we have a ton of new Star Trek Discovery news. It seems to be coming almost every day now. And most of that is due to a feature in Entertainment Weekly magazine. Let's break down the top Star Trek Discovery news stories from this past week. First off, we've learned a little bit more about Sonequa Martin Green's character, Commander Michael Burnham. A lot of people were speculating from the trailer that was released earlier this year that she was part Vulcan, and a lot of other people were speculating that perhaps she was raised on Vulcan but is a human. Well, it turns out that second group is a little closer to being right. It turns out that Michael Burnham is indeed a human. However, she did attend a couple of institutions on Vulcan and spent much of her formative years there. According to Entertainment Weekly's interview of Martin Green, she states that as a child, Michael Burnham attended the Vulcan Learning Center and the esteemed Vulcan Science Academy as an adult. She also went on to imply that we might be seeing Amanda as well as Sarek. You may recall that Brian Fuller, way back when the series was announced and that first test shot of the Discovery was shown, he mentioned that he really likes the character of Amanda, Sarek's wife. So this seems to indicate that we will be seeing her in the show. Martin Green states, "I have the Vulcan conflict in my life from Sarek and Amanda, so there's always going to be that inner conflict with me. But I think it's relatable because we all have some kind of inner conflict going on, who we are versus who we present ourselves to be. There's a lot to be discovered." That's a topic that might be very familiar to Star Trek fans. Star Trek has often showcased that kind of inner conflict, whether it's the dual nature of B'Elanna Torres and her Klingon and human halves warring, or even going back to the very first example, Spock in the original series, half Vulcan, half human, and constantly kind of at war to keep those emotions suppressed. Next up, we have a couple of photographs that were included in the Entertainment Weekly story that I'd kind of like to pick apart a little bit. The first is of Captain Lorca, Jason Isaacs' character, on the bridge of the Discovery. Now in this picture, it's our first glimpse of him as the captain of the Discovery. We see that captain's chair that's been teased a bit in the past, and we saw at the end of that first production trailer. Now we actually see it finished on the bridge. Now again, we don't see very much of the bridge, but what we do see is definitely a stark contrast to what we saw of the Shenzhou's bridge. You may recall a lot of people thought it was a little bit too dark, a little bit too brooding for a Starfleet bridge, kind of wanting those bright colors. Well, it looks like the Discovery bridge still might be a little dark, but it certainly looks a lot brighter than the Shenzhou's bridge. Also, this picture of Jason Isaacs as Captain Gabriel Lorca, I should note, is a human character. Jason Isaacs did have a video of himself on Twitter getting that latex mold done, leading to a lot of speculation that he might be playing an alien character. However, that does not seem to be the case, especially with this image and the name Gabriel Lorca. Another thing with this picture, it highlights what I think is the biggest question I have with the Star Trek Discovery uniforms, and that's the rank insignia. Again, the ranks are on the badges, little tiny pips on the badges, and it's really hard to tell what someone's rank is at a glance, from any distance anyway. So if you notice on his badge, he's got 4 little tiny little pips there that indicate his rank of captain. I'd like that to be a little bit more visible, but what can you do? I'm not the costume designer. Next up, another picture from the Entertainment Weekly feature, this time featuring a transporter room. Now, in the article, they say it's one of a couple of transporter rooms that are in the show. My guess is that this is the transporter room of the Shenzhou. Again, an older ship. Looks like some older technology. They're kind of going for the big disco retro look here. Definitely mixed reactions from a lot of fans on the internet. I don't know. It definitely is a departure from what we're used to. I think it's kind of cool. Again, I think this is the Shenzhou transporter room. I'm hoping the Discovery transporter room looks a little bit more traditional. However, this does look pretty cool, pretty interesting. It does sort of remind me of an episode of Enterprise in the 4th season called Daedalus, where the inventor of the transporter comes aboard, and they do take the panels off of the Enterprise's transporter system. And if you look, there's kind of almost emitters like this embedded in the wall behind them. Now, a lot smaller than this, not quite this big, huge, Marty McFly sound system at the start of Back to the Future. But, this kind of reminds me a little bit of that, and I'm wondering if maybe that was kind of the inspiration here, or if this was just something they came up with on their own. Again, very different. I'm interested to see this transporter in operation. We've seen the effect briefly in the trailer we got earlier, but I'd really like to see the kind of materialization, dematerialization on the transporter pad here. I'm curious to see how this turns out. The other thing with this photo that I wanted to draw attention to is the away team, or sorry, based on the time period we're in, the landing party jackets, kind of almost a combat uniform. Really cool. A little bit of an armored look to them. This makes a lot of sense. It always seems odd to me when Starfleet officers beam down in just their regular uniform. It feels like there's probably not a lot of protection against the elements or any challenges they might be facing. This, however, looks really cool. I love the classic Star Trek Starfleet insignia on the left breast there. And also, now this is really cool, if you zoom right in on the phasers that they're wearing, very retro look to them, very original series, old school. If you look at the one that Michael Burnham has, for example, it has that little knob on the top, just the same way that the classic phasers do. However, the emitter, actually, it looks as though it's kind of the bigger rounded emitter that we see from the laser pistols in the cage and Where No Man Has Gone Before. So definitely going for a bit of a retro look there. Those phasers combined with that flip communicator that we saw in the trailer really makes me excited for the prop design and all that kind of stuff that seems to be harkening back to the original series here. So while a lot of the look seems to be updated, there are a lot of changes. There are some things that are definite nods to the classic series. Very, very cool. Another piece of news that's been making the rounds this past week is this report, also from Entertainment Weekly, that the writers of Star Trek Discovery are going to be ignoring a long-standing rule of Star Trek, and that's that there is a limit to the interpersonal conflict among the Starfleet officer characters. Now, a lot of people have been making a big deal of this, and it is a big deal. A lot of people talked about this rule in The Next Generation and going forward, that it hampered a lot of writing and that sort of thing. But at the same time, it also allowed for very different conflicts to come up, and I think pushed writers to be a lot more creative. However, I think what a lot of people are forgetting is that this rule only came into effect when The Next Generation began airing. It was a desire of Gene Roddenberry to show that humans had evolved to that point where they don't argue, that sort of thing. However, this series is set prior to the original series, and fans of the original series will know there was definitely a lot of interpersonal conflict on that show. One need only look at the grousing between Bones and Spock to see that that's a very common thing. I mean, you got Kirk snapping at McCoy and some of his officers from time to time. There were definitely interpersonal conflicts. That's nothing new. This rule that they're breaking, they're not technically breaking it, because as a show that's set 10 years before the original series, I would expect that they would follow the rules laid out for interactions from that period of time, and not what we get, 100 years later with The Next Generations. I'll link to a TrekCore.com story where they've summarized very well a lot of the points from the Entertainment Weekly article, all these various Star Trek Discovery news items, as well as the individual stories on Entertainment Weekly and IO9 regarding these various Discovery points. One other thing I do want to link to as well is TrekMovie.com has put together an amazing infographic detailing what the Star Trek Discovery uniforms are all about. This is really excellent. The graphic was made by Aaron Harvey, and it really does an amazing job of breaking down all the aspects, from the ranks on the badges to the department colors to the various design elements of the uniforms. He even gets into the boots, which I hadn't really noticed. So a lot of really interesting details. If you're a cosplayer, you might want to check this out. I don't know if maybe it should be titled "Abandon All Hope Ye Who Enter Here," because it looks like it's going to be a very difficult costume to replicate. But it's very cool. I've got a piece of it up here on screen, of course, and I'll link to the full version on trekmovie.com. You can check that out. Besides the infographic, the article also details every little bit that we can see from the uniforms and the EVA suits and the alternate uniforms that we can see in the trailer and all that sort of stuff. So definitely worth checking out. There's also a little bit about the tactical landing party uniforms that we see in this latest picture from Entertainment Weekly. Well, thank you all so much for watching. I'm sure there'll be lots more Discovery news coming out in the months between here and September 24th. So be sure to like this video, subscribe if you want to keep up to date on all the Star Trek news. I also do reviews of books and episodes, so keep an eye out for those. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit. Links to all of those are in the description below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again here in the next video.